Carol is particularly interested in the power of female friendships and the impact of the digital age on in-depth listening, robust conversations, and human empathy. The author of 5 books, she has a popular TEDx talk, Are All Relationships Messy? Check out her sewing shenanigans at www.carolbrees.com, where you can also meet her 91-pound Bernedoodle George, a certified therapy dog who is happily serving CSB SJU students as puppy in residence. Now, please welcome Dr. Carol Bruess.
Hello, everyone. As Amy said, I would love to have you, if you are able, turn on your cameras because we wish we could be together in person, right? And yet, how great that we have bennies here from all over the country. There will be some time in the end for us to do some Q&A and interaction. And we're also going to do a little bit of interaction in the chat feature. And one of the things we're asking you to do, if you could change your screen name to put your full name, and if you're a Benny, put your year, your class year. And if you just hit the 3 little dots up in the top right-hand corner of your photo, and then you can just hit rename. That will come in handy as people are putting, questions or chats in, and then later. We're also, throughout the time today, I'm going to invite you to engage a bit using some of the awesome Zoom functions. So for instance, at times I'll ask you to put up a reaction. So down in the bottom where you see that little face with the plus, let's practice it right now. Choose a reaction. You can choose whatever you want. Hand raises, hearts. I'm going to do a yay, cheer, good job. I can see a few of you. Awesome. And then there will be a few points along the way today where I will also ask you to participate in the chat. So so this isn't necessarily sit back and be sure to be drinking your coffee, absolutely. But there's going to be a little bit of participation today. So let's begin. As Amy said, I'm Carol Bruess, and my area, as you'll quickly get to know, is relationship communication. And in 1990, after I graduated with a degree in art from St. Norbert College in Wisconsin, where Brian and I met as first-year students, I went to Ohio University and earned my MA and PhD in relationship communication with a focus on friendship, women in friendship, and marriage and family. And after that, I became a professor at that university down the road where they wear purple, University of St. Thomas, and spent about the past 28 or so years teaching undergraduates. And 20 of those were at St. Thomas. And as a professor, any professor, of course, worth her salt, loves giving quizzes. So we're going to actually start with a little interaction in the chat. I thought I would give you a little quiz. It's not graded, and you can cheat by messaging your friends, your Benny friends. You won't be kicked out of school. The quiz is not worth any points, but I picked a few questions from the quiz that I always give to my students in my family and couple communication class. And I give it to them on the first day, just to get conversation rolling. And partly to kind of preview what the course is going to be about. I ask them a series of true or false questions about relationships, about family. And again, it's a little bit of a preview to the class. So I picked a few for today, and I'm going to have you respond in the chat with what you think. And I'll do a quick little scan. So I've got like 3 screens going on here. So if you see me looking back and forth, that's what I'm doing. So questions that I ask are questions like this. In most heterosexual marriages, men initiate discussion about problems 80% of the time. True or false? Throw it in the chat. I love it. False, 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 false. Oh, this is great. Love it. You know this, right? False. Question number 2. Families who eat fewer than 5 meals a week together are more likely to have children who engage in risky behavior. For instance, early sex, drug use, and don't do as well academically. True, 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 true. Look at how smart you bennies are. Yes, this one's true. By the way, these questions get progressively harder. So put your thinking caps on. Question number 3, for instance, due to longer lifespans, most parents will spend more time caring for their parents than they will for their children. I'm seeing lots of trues, a few falses, true, false, false, true, false. I love it, y'all. Yeah, this one is actually true. And those of you who are in this phase, right? Like Brian and I have 2 young adult children. We have 3 alive parents, and it's interesting, right? Like many of us know this sandwich generation. Okay, question number 4. You can be lonely in a crowd and lonely in a marriage. True, true. Right. We're going to talk a little bit about loneliness today, and about, yeah, you're absolutely right. Question number 5. Researchers can accurately predict the number of illnesses a married heterosexual woman will experience over a 4-year period based on counting the number of contemptuous facial expressions made by her husband. I know, I'm loving seeing the smiles. Contemptuous facial expressions, right? Rolling your eyes, a smirk. True, question mark, true, true, false, false, true. So the answer to this one, I said it was going to get a little harder, is actually true. And we're going to talk about, I'm going to dig into this as it relates to how thriving relationships, friendship, for instance, with other women is one of the most important things we can do for our immune systems. And I don't want to give it all away yet, but we have this insanely long, beautiful research base now, mountains of evidence over 80 years, longitudinal data. And the research I'm talking about, I'll tell you a bit more later, but it comes from the University of Washington, the Gottman Institute. Last true and false question I'll just kind of share with you, and then we're going to do a fill in the blank. Researchers can predict with 75% accuracy which couples will divorce based on observation of a few key communication behaviors. We got true, 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 true. Whoa, true. False, true. So some of you may know this research. This is the same research from the University of Washington Gottman Institute. They do longitudinal work with couples. It's actually the percentage is 94% accuracy. So it's kind of a trick question. So the answer is false, but it's because we can predict with over 90%, almost 94% accuracy, which couples are likely to divorce based on these few micro moments. So, and we'll talk a little bit later, or if you want to, about that, but if you want to maybe bring it forward into the Q&A, you're welcome to. So my students overall, like you just did in the chat, do pretty well on these questions, right? And then we get to this next question, which is a fill in the blank. And very few of my students, and most of my students over time have been traditional age students, that's a little hint, most of them don't get this answer correct. So here's the question. I'm trying to toggle forward. Okay. It's 3 different questions, all with the same answer. Your job is to figure out what the answer is. What is common to the life experiences of women who report positive emotional well-being later in life? Why do some mothers do better than others, especially in the early years of parenting, when general satisfaction tends to be low and anger and anxiety high? And 3, why is it that even older women who are single are unlikely to be lonely, more likely to live longer, and suffer fewer minor and major illnesses, everything from cancers to colds. Okay, I'm looking at this is great. You have friendships, girlfriends, female friendships. I'm going to ask you if you could get a little bit more specific. Strong female friendships. Supportive. They're going by so quickly. Ones that you see, Benny friendships, CSB sisterhoods, deep connections, 1 to 2 strong friendships. Doesn't have to. I love it. Multi-generational women's relationships, 1 good, family connections, vulnerability. I love it. Again, sorry, there's a little bit of delay in the slide. These are all Bennies who are pictured here. This was my hint slide. If we were in person, I would have you chat amongst yourselves. Oh, I love it. Having social bonds outside the parameters of family. Love it. Holistic perspective. What we know from the research is that the answer is that these women who do better are significantly socially connected. And we're gonna really dissect what that means. So they do have meaningful friendships with others. They have meaningful friendships with other women. They are significantly socially connected. And I think that one of the reasons so many of my students, for instance, don't get this answer right, partly because maybe it's stage of life, right? Because younger women haven't had necessarily as many experiences where those social connections have really been essential. But I think the answer a lot of us don't, or the reason a lot of us don't get this right is because we take the answer for granted, right? And what is increasingly exciting to me as a relationship researcher is the growing volume of evidence we have about why, about what is underneath the bond of women in particular, and why it is such a powerful contributor to every aspect of our health and well-being. And I'm not talking only about our mental health. I'm talking about our physical health. We know now that there are mountains of scientific evidence to help us explain the why and how that human relationships are literal superpowers. And so, for instance, we're going to dig into this. The fact that when we spend time with other women in friendship, when we protect each other by being in friendship and solidarity, so many things that we were mentioning in the chat, we actually are significantly reducing the stress hormones in our bodies. So we have this mountain of research on oxytocin and the power of oxytocin in a stressed female body. And it's one of the clues. And many of you probably have seen, especially in the last 5-6 years, in the popular press, some great work explaining what oxytocin is. Oxytocin is so popular, it even has a nickname, right? It's called the cuddle hormone. I'm not going to go deep into this, and I'm not a neuroscientist, but oxytocin is, really briefly, a peptide hormone and neuropeptide, again, nicknamed the cuddle hormone, that encourages women in particular to build strong bonds with other women, which in turn helps us ward off the harmful effects of stress. And without getting, again, too technical, but I think it's important, here's a brief stress hormone lesson and how gender matters. For instance, it is. If Amy and Val, you can be watching the chat, I'm not able to fully, so apologies if someone's asking me to explain something and I'm not able to look over there. So when women and men are stressed, doesn't matter what kind of body you're in, the hormones cortisol and epinephrine are released together. And both of those raise our blood sugar and our circulating blood sugar levels. And then there's beautiful oxytocin. The oxytocin comes into play, and oxytocin does a few awesome things. It counters the production of cortisol and epinephrine. It produces a feeling of calm It reduces fear. It counters some of the negative effects of just everyday stressors, right? The little things and the big things. Male bodies, on average, release much smaller amounts of oxytocin than female bodies. So for many men, not all, but for many male bodies, the fight or flight response is felt more acutely. Thus, many, not all, and this is a 8-credit class in and of itself about gender and communication and gender socialization. But some men, given their bodies and socialization, will turn away from relationships when stressed. Flooding propels some males away from other humans. On the other hand, one of the things we know based on the research and based on, in part, due to oxytocin, based on some socialization, is that women in friendship is hardwired for many of us. And the oxytocin part of this, right, the release into our bloodstreams of this hormone that is designed to help us connect with others. It's designed, for instance, for us, I'm a mother, so I'll use myself as an example, to care for these little humans that I've been charged to care for right now, who are 6'4" and 6 feet tall. So one of the things that the research has revealed that I found so fascinating early on, in research study after research study has shown this again, is that when life presents women challenges, women on the whole, again, not all, but women on the whole tend to seek out friendship with other women as a means of regulating their stress levels. The latest and the greatest research, as I indicated before, reveals the why and the how of women's connections, and why and how they are specifically significant to our health as we get older. So the research reveals that the more friends and the more socially connected a woman is as she ages, the less likely she is to suffer serious and significant health problems. We know that women who lack satisfying social connections are more likely to suffer from colds, heart attacks, and have a host of significant health problems. Women with fewer relationships and/or unsatisfying relationships are more likely to die in every category of death, from car accidents to homicide to cancer to infection. And this is where I'm always wanting to have a little interaction. Why do you think, for instance, people who have unsatisfying relationships, so people who are lonely, why might they be more likely to die, for instance, in a car accident? So I'm going to look over at the chat here. Why do you think this is? I know it's a tough one, right? And if someone wants to feel really brave, raise their hand. We can unmute you. They are alone in the car, no one to help them. Drinking, reckless driving might be more common. Fatigue. Yeah, could you repeat the question again? Is sadness a distraction? So my question is, preoccupied, emotionally distracted. Why is it that, for instance, people who are lonely are more likely to die in a car accident than people who are members of satisfying friendships and relationships? Acting out aggression, depression. Okay, is it Nritya? You want to unmute?
Yes, I was not sure what things I was pressing, but yes, it is Nritya. I think so also when you have strong social friendships, that also builds a lot more neural connections in your brain. So that helps your reaction time. And it's like, I live in Dubai, and even though Dubai is very popular in the world, one of the few things people know about Dubai is it's the third loneliest city in the world. So people just go to work and they just come home. And it's also coincidentally, we have one of the highest number of automobile accidents.
Hmm.
So I'm wondering, with the research you just said, that if there is a correlation between the two, because a lot of people, like for me, I'm a very extroverted person. So I think my natural personality trait is I don't have a problem striking conversation with strangers. But every time when I've spoken to somebody, they would say things like, you're the first person I've spoken to today, or things like that. And that, to a large extent, not only brings your mood down, but it also sorts of dulls your brain. So when you're driving, like in the usual cycle, you don't react as much to danger.
You got it. A+. Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah, no, it's so
you.
interesting. Again, I was just scanning the chat, and this is such an interesting, right, preview and transition of what we're going to talk about, going forward, and why these friendships and why these relationships are so important to our health in every way. Because, for instance, loneliness has such a profound effect on all parts of our bodies. So we're more likely to take risks, right? When we feel like, what does it matter? We're less likely to sleep well. And we know driving while exhausted is very close to, depending on your level of sleep deprivation, right? Your reaction times are not that different than being mildly drunk, right? And we know that no driving and drinking, right? So it's fascinating when we start to look at the why investing in our relationships is so essential. And we can point right back to and understand from the research that we are less likely to die in any category of death when we invest in our relationships, right? This isn't extra. So in fact, the researchers of the longitudinal Harvard nurses study, and if you're interested in the study, many of you probably have already heard about it. They have a really great public-facing website. Just Google, not right now though, longitudinal Harvard nurses study. They found that the lack of close female friendships is as bad for your health as smoking cigarettes and obesity. Specifically, the Harvard longitudinal nurses study found that you are likely to live an average of 15 years longer if you are a person surrounded by a tightly connected circle of friends who regularly gather to eat, to share gossip, to do whatever, play cards, talk about a book, not talk about a book, drink wine, whatever it is you do with your friends. You are likely to live 15 years longer than the people who aren't doing those things. I know, right? If we were in it together and I could see all your faces and I see some of you taking notes, shocking. We can get even a little bit more micro. For instance, researcher Dr. Sheldon Cohen at Carnegie Mellon University found that the stronger a person's social network, the less likely that person will get the common cold. Specifically, in Dr. Cohen's research, they found that people who received a lot of hugs and then were exposed to cold viruses were significantly less likely than those who weren't hugged to get sick. And people are always like, how do you study this? For instance, what Dr. Cohen did is recruited college students, had them keep a journal for a couple weeks. How many hugs did you get from friends, family? And then they bring them in the lab and they give them usually a $15 gift card to Target or Starbucks. And then they shove a cold virus up their nose. And they found that the people who had received more hugs and exposed to the cold virus, controlling for all the other variables, were significantly less likely to get sick. Isn't that fascinating, right? Remember earlier when I talked about the number of contemptuous facial expressions by husbands in a heterosexual marriage could predict the number of illnesses the wife would experience over that next 4-year period? Contempt, again, I gave you a few examples, the roll of the eyes, the little smirk. We know, based on this research, again, from the Gottman Institute, University of Washington, they followed couples for a number of years so they could see, they tested a whole host of things, that it comes back to stress, right? So when you are in an interpersonal relationship, especially one like a marriage or a close friendship or a family relationship, that your most trusted people, and you are being told, for instance, through others' facial expressions, that what you are saying doesn't matter, right? So contempt expressed in words, and actually I'll have you put in the chat. What is someone saying when they roll their eyes at you, right? Like without having to say anything at all. If someone rolls their eyes, what are they saying? They're annoyed. Whatever, man. You're dismissed. Whatever. Yeah, you're discounted. You're wrong. You're irritated. You're stupid. Yes. What you said is not important. You're an idiot. Exactly. I don't value you, your opinion. You're absolutely right. What Dr. John Gottman and Dr. Julie Gottman would say is that contempt is the cancer of relationships, right? Because, and if we were to had a few more hours, we could talk about those micro behaviors that we know predict divorce, because over time, the volume of emotional stress and physical stress when someone is saying to you, your partner, your close friend, your colleague, you're an idiot, or I don't care what you have to say, right? And they don't even have to say that, but those expressions, that translates to stress in our bodies and thus more illnesses. So one of the things we're going to do next is I'm going to share with you a number of my favorite resources and tell you what some of the research shows. So you'll see some books on the screen. This is recorded, so you'll have access to it, and we can share these slides as well. But one of my favorite contemporary sources on this whole topic, the complex, fascinating science across multiple disciplines that explains everything we've talked about so far in a very accessible way, is Susan Pinker's book called The Village Effect. I also, she has a great TED talk, The Secret to Living Longer May Be Your Social Life. In her book, Dr. Pinker summarizes the research of people like Dr. Julianne Holt-Lunstad, who did a series of studies which included tens of thousands of middle-aged people. And she actually did a meta-analysis of all these other studies that included middle-aged people. And what Dr. Lunstad wanted to do was look at every aspect of lifestyle, exercise, diet, marital status, doctor visits, smoking, drinking, socioeconomics, the quality of the air people are breathing, the size of their family, all of the variables. And she wanted to know over time which factors of a person's life would be the single best predictor of how long that person would live. Was it clean air? Nope. Was it getting your blood pressure treated? I mean, it was an okay, but not best predictor. Are you overweight? Do you exercise? Those were moderate predictors in her meta-analysis. Do you get your flu vaccine? By the way, everyone should get their flu shot. Have you reduced, drinking moderation? Have you stopped smoking? Getting closer to being good predictors, but not the top predictors. What she found was that second to the top in the best predictor of how long we'll live, all of us will live, is the quality of our close relationships. And those are defined as close relationships, defined in this research, as the people you could call for a loan, who will sit with you while you mourn the loss of your dog or your partner, or who would take you to a doctor's appointment. The biggest surprise to Lunstad and Pinker, who found almost identical things in her global research, was the answer to that multiple choice question earlier, that the number one predictor is this thing called social integration. Basically, how do we define social integration? How much do you interact with, how much do you engage with people face to face as you move about your day? And not just the people that are closest to us, right? Not just our close friends, our family members, our spouses, our neighbors, but do you talk to the person who's making coffee, or that you're, the barista in the morning? Do you have a book club or a bridge club or a whatever club? Do you play pickleball, right? Do you speak to the person behind you in line at the grocery store? Do you acknowledge, right, that they exist? Say, hey, cute baby, or I've never tried those chips, do you recommend them? Although I don't recommend looking in other people's grocery carts because, yeah, it drives me crazy sometimes. But do you talk to the person who is working out about the same time of you every day? Do you come to a Benny Day celebration, right? Do you reach out and to your other Benny? Those interactions, based on this global research, tens of thousands of participants, those are the strongest predictors of how long you'll live. Stronger than quitting smoking, losing weight, going to the doctor. All those things are important, right? But in her book, what Dr. Pinker does is summarize the science that helps us understand this powerful connection between our health and social connection. And there's a lot of clues in the loneliness research, right? And she talks a lot about loneliness, and I love that loneliness, right, has come front and center in our world as an epidemic. So, for instance, she cites the British epidemiologist Andrew Steptoe. Andrew Steptoe is kind of the guru of loneliness. What Dr. Steptoe describes is that feeling lonely exaggerates the inflammation and reactivity to stress, and this is a direct quote, that are linked to heart disease, while also interfering with our ability to retain facts and solve problems. It was the well-known loneliness researcher John Capiccio and his colleagues who found that loneliness drives up the cortisol and blood pressure levels that damage our internal organs in both sexes and at all stages at all ages and stages of adult life. They report that feeling lonely is as painful as being wildly hungry or thirsty. Many of you might have noted just a couple months ago, our Surgeon General of the United States, Dr. Vivek Murthy, released an advisory report titled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. And it's important to know, and I have to admit, I didn't know this, that the Surgeon General only releases advisories, or they reserve advisories for issues deemed significant public health challenges and ones that, I quote, need the American people's immediate attention. He released this advisory just this last May. And what his report does is it highlights some of the research already in this presentation. For instance, that lacking social connections can increase the risk for premature death, comparable to smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And in an interview with NPR, Dr. Murthy explains that the physical consequences of poor social connections can be devastating, including a 29% increased risk of heart disease, a 32% increased risk of stroke, and a 50% increased risk of developing dementia for older adults. Poor social connections can have these consequences. And it's interesting because you start to be like, oh gosh, right? Like, should I be optimistic? Well, Dr. Murthy's optimistic. I am incredibly optimistic because we know that we can change our realities. And the really good news about all this, and again, a different for credit class, but is that just some micro changes in our daily behaviors as we interact with others. For instance, it's one of the reasons I wanted you to turn your cameras on today, right? And even though we can't physically be in each other's presence, when we see the human face, something changes in our body, right? It's even better, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, when we're in each other's physical presence. But if we can approximate, right? Like I'm just looking right now at some of your faces, which I much prefer versus looking at my notes. Like just seeing someone smile, like everyone right now, look at other people's pictures and smile. Like just pretend. I know, right? So what just happened, right? In all of our bodies was a free little bit of legal drugs, right? There was a little bit of dopamine that just was released when we see another face smiling at us. But back to the loneliness research. One of the things we know, whoops, forgot that little animation. One of the things we know is, and this is based on research done with widows. And there's research by 3 Harvard professors who shows that widows and widowers live longer, for instance, if they choose to live in neighborhoods filled with other widows. They explain that to properly age in place, we are wise to live near a group of like-minded people who create the intimacy of a tight-knit village. And because we can't do experiments, not ethical ones, no one should be doing them, of social isolation, we have some really interesting research of female rats. And that body of research is really important to look at. Researchers, for instance, have found that socially isolated female lab rats developed 84 times as many breast cancer tumors as the female rats who lived in groups. 84 times as many breast cancer tumors. What they also found was that isolation of these female lab rats increased the number of tumor masses by 135%. And among those isolated rats, tumors were more widespread, developing 3 and often 4 mammary quadrants. Essentially, what we know is that and I'm quoting Dr. Pinker here, a rich network of face-to-face relationships creates a biological force field against disease. And face-to-face is key. What we know from the research, and we now have enough research to make these conclusions, is that the same benefits at the same level are not being found when we mediate our interactions through digital technologies. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not important, like FaceTiming with your partner or your grandkids or your friends. It's awesome. Would it be better if you were in each other's physical presence? Yes, because the neuroscience is showing that live face-to-face interaction sparks these regions of our brain, this greater activity in our brain that are linked with social cognition and reward. And there's a whole bunch of research that backs this up, that there is a power in the physical presence, there's a power in eye contact, there's power in the touch, the handshake, the sound of another's voice. And it's not just true for women, but essential for men as well. And here's one of the worries, right? And after the pandemic, so much Zoom time, we're a little bit worried about the increases in loneliness. And one of the things that I've been studying for the last about 12, 14 years is the impact of the digital age on our human connections, on our relationships. And I'm going to give you the quick summary now, and then we're going to wrap this up and get to Q&A in the next 8 minutes or so, by talking about what we can do, right? Like, we know the why. What can we do to enhance the chances we're going to live 15 years longer? But one of the things we know from the research on the digital age, as it impacts us and our ability to have profound social connection, is that as we interact with our wonderful digital devices, right? And I always say, I'm not anti-tech, I am pro-relationships. But we have found, for instance, that we have developed as humans a symbiotic relationship with our digital devices, especially our smartphones. Symbiotic, a relationship of mutual dependence. According to Pew Research, we have a love affair with our smartphones. And they're different than our iPads and our laptops. There is something, and we're studying it now, that these things, right? Oh, my cute dog. My kids are always like, Mom, you have a picture of the dog and not us on your home screen. I'm like, yep. But the Pew Research shows that we use the same words or similar words to talk about our phones as we talk about the people we love the most. And I have this slide up here because we now know when we interact, right? When we go on Instagram, or we scroll through Facebook Marketplace, or we are on Twitter, or whatever it's called now, or on TikTok, this is what's happening in our brain. The nucleus accumbens, this reward center, is like doing a happy dance, right? And it makes us want to come back for more. We are so basic as humans. We want to feel good, right? Reduce pain, increase the feeling good. And so what research is showing is that we've actually started creating an emotional bond with our smartphones. Many of us see phones as extension of self, as an appendage to their bodies. The neurochemical high we get from the little buzzes and notifications and retweets and relikes and whatever you do on TikTok, I've decided I don't know, on TikTok, is similar to taking a hit of cocaine. And I always have to say, I don't recommend cocaine. Please don't do drugs, right? I have to say this to my students. But we know that that is the same hit that's happening in our brain. According to University of Chicago's Booth School of Business, Twitter, or X, is more addicting than cigarettes. So the research as a whole on this topic is why that I always argue, and I will continue to believe and argue, that we have to critically consider this collective love affair that we have with our smartphones in particular. And I'm going to give you a few resources if you're equally passionate about this topic or want the best of the best research. This is Dr. Sherry Turkle of MIT. Two of my favorite books of hers are there on screen. And then if you Google her, you can watch what I think is one of the best TED Talks of all time. Both of these books are written for popular audience, popular press. They are incredible. The one on the bottom is her most recent, Reclaiming Conversation. I can't say enough about this book. I actually completely changed a course I had been teaching for 28 years, interpersonal communication, to use this book as the center of the class because it's so profound. What she points out based on her research and summaries of the mountain of research we have on these topics now, because smartphones and digital devices have been in our hands for decades now, is that technology has a powerfully seductive undertow in all of our lives. And she points out, of all of the changes in our social worlds, here's one truth that we cannot overlook. It's the fact that we rarely give each other our full attention anymore. That we rarely, when we are in each other's presence, we rarely give each other our full attention. And we've forgotten that almost all young people are growing up without ever having experienced unbroken conversations. Most of us have never experienced single tasking or unitasking. And so what she does in this book is really urge us with the data to say why it is essential we reclaim conversation, right? In all aspects of our lives, at work, at home, in friendship. And what I would say, if you're interested and you're feeling motivated by just the mention of this, these two books together are a really great pair. Cal Newport wrote this book, Digital Minimalism, and it's one of the processes. I love his work as a whole. Digital minimalism gives you a really doable way to take a look at and reassess your relationship to technology as it allows you to reclaim the things that you really value, right? The relationships, the people around you. I will just mention this, and then we're going to move toward the last part of this and then discussion. One of the things that has shocked me most in this research, when we look at the influence of the digital age on human connection, is around the topic of empathy. We know, based on research that has been being done for over the last 30 plus years, and this is research done with college students, this big national database, have been given the same empathy scales for many, many years. We have found, and we know this isn't just college students, but we have the data, there has been a 40% decrease in human empathy in the last 20 years alone. And although we can't, of course, know for sure the absolute cause, and surely there are many variables, many researchers believe that it's the reduced time in eye contact with others face to face, which is one of the key culprits, right? Because the most precipitous drop in empathy came in the years immediately after smartphones were in the hands of almost all of us. And there's been a really interesting body of research, and Dr. Turkle addresses this as well, where there is this growing discontent among children of all ages about their parents and their grandparents' uses of phones and their inability to get their parents and grandparents and their caregivers' attention. This research just breaks my heart. As Turkle says, children are begging their parents to put down their phones at dinner and elsewhere. Dr. Turkle talks about this flipped reality that for the first time in the history of ever, we have teenagers begging for more attention from their parents, right? Like whenever have teenagers actually wanted, like parents say, hey, pay attention, I'm over here, right? Like, here's what I'm doing. We know based on this research, all of our use of digital technology has added up to us as humans attending to our digital devices 8 billion times a day. 8 billion times. And we also know what is true is that there is no such thing as multitasking. So we can't be attending to another human and our device at the same time. And the inconvenient truth of this whole matter is that our current love affair with technology is inconvenient because it's very seductive, right? It's way easier in our lives not to do anything to change our habits because they feel really good. But they're not adding 15 years to our lives, right? So let me give you a few other little bits of resources that you can use and just a little bit more. And then I want to get to some of the dialogue because I see so many good things happening over here in the chat. So one of my all-time, might be my second favorite next to Dr. Turkle's TED Talks is this one. If we were in a room together, I'd be like, how many of you have seen this? Dr. Robert Waldinger is the current director of what's known as the 75-year Harvard study of adult development. It's the longest running study of adult development ever. It's actually in year 83 or 84 right now. This TED Talk does a beautiful job summarizing it. He also has a new book out. I just got it about a month ago. It's called The Good Life. It's The Good Life. The subtitle is Lessons from the World's Longest Scientific Study of Happiness. Create a more meaningful and satisfying life. So I'm about halfway through it. But what Waldinger and his team have done is they've been able to, over this 83 or 84 years, collected literally tens of thousands of pages of information from following what began with 724 men back in the early 1900s. Yes, they were all men to start with, starting in 1938 and continuing today, which, do the math, is that 84 years? Anyway, art major here. And after a number of years of their study, they began adding spouses, children, other family members to the study. So there were women added, right? And this book, The Good Life, kind of takes you into all that. And although there are so many important and interesting findings from this 83 or 4-year study, what Dr. Waldinger found and the team was that those individuals who are most satisfied in their relationships, most socially integrated at age 50, were the healthiest at age 80. The people who are most satisfied in their relationships at age 50 were the healthiest at age 80. And I'm going to quote Waldinger directly here. The lessons from this study aren't about wealth or fame or working harder and harder. The clearest message that we get from this 75-year study is this: good relationships keep us happier and healthier, period. And he goes on to explain, and this backs up most of the other research for the people I've talked about already, it's not the number of friends you have, and it's not whether or not you're in a committed relationship. Rather, it's the quality of your close relationships that matter. Good face-to-face relationships keep us happier and healthier. Social connections are good for us, and loneliness kills. So, okay, there we go. So, all of the above is why my colleague and former student, Dr. Anna Kudak, and I wrote this book, What Happy Women Do, which is the foundation of what we're talking about today. And I think it's interesting to just give you the very brief history of how Anna Kudak, Dr. Kudak, who's from St. Cloud, actually, and then became my student at St. Thomas, and she's the mother of 4 kids, still a dear friend of mine. She actually bought my and Brian's old house. She and her husband and 4 kids live there. But she and I have been studying the intimate relationships of marriages and how rituals of connection in marriages are important for couples. And so we actually wrote 2 books. I think they're on the slide here. Yeah, we actually wrote 2 books about couples, What Happy Couples Do, What Happy Parents Do. And one of the interesting things that happened is as we were interviewing couples about their marriages, so many of the women talked about and wanted to talk about the rituals they had with their friends, right? And we were struck in the interviews and the surveys where so many of these women talked about the close bonds of their female friends, their sisters, the sisterhoods, the aunts, the female colleagues, the mentors, the mentees, and the functions that those bonds serve. And so we wrote this book, What Happy Women Do, where we gathered the stories of 55 sets of sisters, women friends, besties, and we documented their rituals of connection. And so we and other researchers who study ritual, we think about ritual in this way. Rituals are any repeated act that pays homage to a person, a relationship, or something that is sacred, something that has value. And without getting too technical, because I'm going to end with a couple ritual stories from this book, and then I want to hear some of yours. Ritual happens anytime we're paying homage to something that is sacred, again, something that's important to us. And this is key, it's always about something bigger than the act or the components of the ritual itself, right? It's really, when you think about Benny Day, like when I think about Benny Day, it's not about the food or the bands or the speeches, the lunches, the wine, the red balloons, the free t-shirts. Like this morning, I was driving around campus with St. Ben's student president, Claire Moonin, and we had George, our dog, in the golf cart giving Benny's a ride and handing out free t-shirts, right? Those things are beautiful. What Benny Day is about is something so much bigger, right? It's about paying homage to what it means to be a Benny. It's about paying homage to the relationships you've built with the faculty and the staff and your friends and the monastics. It's paying homage to being a member of this Benny community. And it's author Robert Fulghum in his book, I love this quote, reminds us that rituals are the coin by which attention is paid to the moment. And what this suggests is that rituals are purely symbolic and valuable only in the way that we ascribe it such value. And so we collected a whole host of these stories in our book, and I'm going to, in the interest of time, just read the very last one to you very briefly. It's called A Better Sister. One of the things I've been working on these days is being a better sister. I have one sister who is the complete opposite of me. I decided to call her for her birthday and say, your present is that I'm going to be a better sister. So I dug in my files and I pulled out all of the postcards from the different places I visited, like New York or wherever, and I stuck them right in the kitchen. So when I think of my sister, I can pop a stamp on one and I send it. When I think of something like, oh, I want to tell so-and-so, I just jot it down and I send it. Everyone gets emails, but snail mail is so not in vogue anymore. So that's a new thing I'm implementing this year, being a better sister. And some of these rituals that people shared were funny and silly but all of them meaningful to the people themselves. I am going to advance. I was going to tell you a story about my late friend Lisa, who died of cancer, but we're not going to do that because it's 3 minutes to noon or 3 minutes to 1. What I do want to end with is this. I wanted today, and I hope today, got you thinking about the primary question, which is, how do you salute the women in your life? How do you intentionally and mindfully and spiritually care for the crucial and substantial relationships you have in your female friendships in particular? How do you use your power to lift and empower others? What we know from this body of data is that it really only takes one in a relationship to another person to change someone's life. And when we change one life, we change a family. And when we change a family, we change an entire community. And we now have enough science to tell us that what we probably already knew in our hearts, and maybe why you said yes to being here today to learn about this topic on Benny Day, is that it is essential that we together empower and lift up our sisterhoods, and that we embrace and appreciate the other women in our lives, because they are the people who are going to help us live 15 years longer and empower us to be the biggest that we can be. So I'm going to end with go Bennies, and we're going to open it up for some questions. Now I can look over and look at your faces.
Carol, many of the questions came about introversion and extroversion in this research. What can you comment in general about people who are introverts? Because this stressed out some of us who relate to that category.
Yes. And you know what I love is that is almost always the first question that's asked when I give any version of this presentation, right? Is they're like, wait a second, is it always about like, right? Do the extroverts have all the advantage? So lifelong extrovert here. I actually wasn't an extrovert until first grade. I cried a lot, and my mom didn't even think I'd go to kindergarten because I was so shy and quiet and reserved. I know that's why she laughs still. My parents stay like, you're a professor and a speaker. So here's the good news, right? So what we know is that all of this exists on a continuum, and that we have different levels of needs for this kind of interaction, right? So social integration for an introvert might look very different than social integration for a Carol Bruess, right? Or a Sigrid, or I'm trying to see who's on the screen here, who I know is a super, raise your hand if you're an extrovert. A couple, Rita, yep, Sigrid, I knew it. Martha Young, raise your hand. So we might not, hold on, I got something up there. Okay. We might, for instance, I might need more, right? Like for instance, when I get a cold or a flu or COVID or whatever, and I'm home for a week at a time, I start to get significantly depressed, right? Even after a day, because I'm like, I need social interaction. Or even if I'm home, working on research or writing all day, I'm like, I can't wait to get out of the house, right? To go see some bennies or see some students. And we don't have any neighbors here at Renner House, right? The soccer field where I'll be like, hey, soccer players. You might get that same benefit from just a little bit of that interaction. So it's really important to know that there is not one prescription, but what we know is that we all need it, right? At some level, we need it. Martha, you have your hand up. Is it okay if I toggle up to Martha? Val? Amy? Okay.
Sorry that I have my hand up, but
no, it's good. I just didn't want to break protocol.
Yeah, nope, you're not breaking protocol. It's so fun to see all these faces. So there's a lot of familiar ones for sure. I actually think that well, one, this is brilliant. So thank you so much for taking the time to have this webinar. But I think that the loneliness factor is really real, especially with people who are virtual. And you crave human interaction. And I think what I worry about is my kids that are in college right now, and are they going to be in an environment where they're going to be challenged? They're going to see mentorship. They're going to observe people communicating and having to present. And I think that that's the concerning thing for us and for people who have children that are either in high school or college. It's like, think about all the experiences we've had because we were face to face. So I worry about that a lot, actually.
And Martha, I'm so glad you brought that up, because that should be one of our greatest worries, right? And what we saw happen in the pandemic, right? Where that level of loneliness was exaggerated, right? And in a way, thank goodness for Zoom and thank goodness for FaceTime. But let's zoom out, even, not thinking about the COVID era. There's a whole body of research, and I was hinting at quite a bit of it today, about the impact of the digital age on our young people in particular, right? And it's not that, we want to get nostalgic, and many of us on here are like, well, when I was little, right? But it is true, right? When I was a teenager, we had one phone in our house, and it was attached to the wall, and it had a cord, and it was in the kitchen. Right. There were no like private conversations. When I got home, my parents were very strict. Like, you're going to be home at 10:30 p.m. And if you aren't foot in the door by then, you got all these extra chores. But when I got home and then I'd go to my bedroom, what I had was myself, right? Maybe a teen magazine or whatever, but they didn't even really allow that. I had a book. I had myself. It's self-reflection. One of the things that I think is brilliant about Sherry Turkle's work is that she addresses how technology has disrupted the virtuous circle of human conversation, the most human and humanizing thing we do, partly because it disrupts solitude and self-reflection. So one of the things that worries me about our young people, especially in the digital age, is that if we are unable to be alone, we will be lonely, right? And so if you were to ask my advice, if you have children, grandchildren, or you're mentoring college students, like many of us are, it is that we, the adults, right? We, the parents, the grandparents, the caregivers, we have to demand these sacred spaces where we are going to practice face-to-face, human, messy conversations, right? It is our job, and Dr. Turkle talks a lot about this as well. It's our job to create those spaces. For instance, whatever it is, whether it's whenever we're in the car together, there are no digital devices. Right? Your kids might, depending on what age, they might protest that, right? Like, whoa, wait. They're like, nope, we can either talk or we can sit in silence and look out the window, right? Because both of those things are good. But one of the things that's concerned me working with college students and as a professor or mentor and as a communication professor is that we've had to go back to the basics, right? Where we have to actually practice like, okay, let's have a conversation where you listen and respond with empathy. And then we have to define that, right? Like come back to, how to address someone, when you see them, how to look at them, how to, right? And so it's I think an important topic you bring up. We have to go back to the basics and teach each other why reclaiming conversation is the most important thing we can do. And then we have to model it, right? So anyway, thank you for that really great question. I don't even know if I answered it. Were there other questions, Val or Amy, you wanted to bring forward?
Yeah, and people, I know we're running a little over, so people can feel free to drop out whenever you need to go. That's fine. We have, I think, one more question. That's a good one. It's a beefy one. Geneva, thank you for asking. The question is, how do we address the impact of our economic system, like capitalism and driving the digital age for profit, and the divisiveness of our current political situation that benefit from keeping people apart? What thoughts might you have on that?
Yes. Well, I mean, I love the question, right? And it's something that challenges me every day. And I'm going to give you an example, which I hope is a pretty easy, not easy answer. And it's about reclaiming conversation and being willing to be in the dialogues, not just the ones that make us feel good, right? And not coming into dialogue with an agenda. But for instance, Brian and I lived in St. Paul for 23 years, raised our kids there, right? Our first jobs and careers. We lived in neighborhoods surrounded by all these, people, universities and colleges and, our church community. When we moved to Northeastern Wisconsin, right? It's our alma mater. We, went there. We grew up in Wisconsin. I realized really quickly that I had just spent the last 25 years surrounding myself with people who thought like I did, right? And suddenly I had neighbor relationships with people where I was like, wait, what sign do you have in the yard? Wait, what? Right? And one of the things that Brene Brown says that I love and I think about daily is people are hard to hate close up. So move in, right? And when I hear that and when I think about it, right, move in, meaning let's be in dialogue, right? Like we don't always have to talk about all the hard things, but when we establish trust, right, when we attune to each other, when we are willing to ask about that person's story, right? Tell me about how you came to put that sign in your yard, or maybe you don't even start there, right? But like, tell me about your family. Where did you grow up? What's keeping you up at night? What's challenging you, right? To engage in dialogue like that, that is the only thing, right? That is going to sort of, I think, peel back and let us reveal our better angels, right? The best versions of ourselves as humans. It's interesting. So many of you know our son is a tech entrepreneur, right? Computer science grad from Stanford. He came out of the womb basically coding, right? And I always say that's because I breastfed you. Yep. But what's interesting is he is super anti big tech. He is not on almost any social platforms. And I use him as an example too, because what gives me the most hope about, for instance, this question and the ills of our world are our students. Our young people, our students, our college students, they are making the choices. Like I see our son and our daughter, 23 and 27-year-old, saying, no, we're deleting this stuff from our phones. We're going to do flip phones. We're going to make our screens go gray, right? Because it doesn't release the same kind of chemicals in your brain. It's not as satisfying, right? These are little bits of resistance that collectively, because our college students are the next leaders, right? They're the parents, they are the ones who are going to solve, right? Be part of the solution to these big problems. I don't know if I adequately answered your question, but leaning in to other humans and just being willing to be in their presence. I'm going to end with this one other resource, and I meant to grab the book off my shelf. I don't think I can reach it, but it's called Love 2.0. I'm blank, but Love 2.0. What Dr. Fredrickson says in this book. Oh, I really want to grab it. I'll try if you want to stay on for a minute. Basically, what she says is that our willingness to be in the physical presence of others is creating these, what she calls micro moments of positivity resonance. And she says, she's a neuroscientist, psychologist who studied this, that even when we are in each other's physical presence, And we don't even say a word, like maybe we're checking out at Target. There is a micro moment of love that occurs where your physical body and mind have synced up in this little tiny way that we're just starting to understand, right, in our research. But there is something that's happening in our vagal nerve, that nerve that connects your heart and your head. She has found, and other researchers have also provided evidence, that these micro moments of positivity resonance, which she's calling love, these little moments of human love, as we have fewer and fewer of them, there's this whole cascade of other negative things that are happening. Increased loneliness, right? More likely to be agonism, right? The taking a warlike stance when it's not aggressive warlike stance, when it's not called for, right? We're much more likely, never read the comment sections, right? To just be our worst selves when we're not in someone's physical presence, but leaning in. It's hard to hate people close up. So lean into conversation. I think that's part of it, right? Committing to being in conversation and dialogue. Anyway, I'm going to stop now.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Carol. This was really wonderful. And thank you all for hanging in an extra 15 minutes almost. So, Amy, what final comments do we have for the day?
Yeah, I second that. Thank you, Dr. Bruess, for your time. And thank you to our audience for attending today's presentation. We hope you enjoyed it. We will be sending out an evaluation later this week, asking for feedback on the presentation. And I know there was a question in the chat about sending a list of resources that Carol mentioned today, and we can absolutely include that as well. And then there will also be a link to a form we're going to be using to gather stories of Benny friendship rituals. Benny friendships are often lifelong and transformational relationships. So start thinking about if you have a monthly dinner date or an annual holiday party, Benny pen pal, and we'll want to hear about it in that form as well. But thank you again, everyone, for coming, and happy Benny Day, everybody.
And I'm happy. I will stay on for a few minutes. If someone has a question, they're just like, I really want to ask it. So I can just hang on for a bit. But thank you, everyone, for coming. Happy Benny Day. If you're around campus, I'm going to be driving a golf cart around campus, giving people rides. Sigrid, do you want to hang on and unmute? Yeah. You're muted. Yep. She's getting it.
Yes. One of the things, speaking from a little different place on the age continuum, why do we value, when we speak of our elderly parents, the model is, my mother is 92 and she's still living alone and keeping her own house and maintaining her own life. And what I think is, she must be lonely. I live in a building with about 150 widows, so I'm not terribly worried about finding widow companions when I need to. But it just bothers me that we place such value in remaining separate in our own homes and not moving when you need to in a congregate setting where you have friends around you every day and you're communicating on all sorts of levels.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just saying it because I'm sure many of people in this group are in that stage of worrying about their parents. Mm-hmm. And if you want your mother to live a long time, she's got to have somebody to talk to.
Yeah. And there's so much thank you for bringing that forward, right? There's, and I think some of it, right, is the fear of lack of autonomy or the level of care, exploitation, all that. And also I think what you're saying is so important for all of us to consider as we have conversations, right, with our, the elders in our lives. And, I think this research on widows living well as they surround themselves with other widows and widowers, right? The research on the tight-knit village is pretty profound. So yeah, I'm glad you brought that forward.
My best friend is 102.
Wow. Wow.
She chats up everybody she meets.
I love it.
So
One of the things that I valued is and made a priority is having friends across the generations, right? And I feel so lucky that I'm always surrounded with college students who, keep me young, and our kids are still youngish, but like to have friends in every generation has really helped me be a better human. Yeah.
thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah. Thanks, Sigrid.
I wanted to say I actually agreed with the example that you gave about your son, and also like Geneva's question here in the chat, because you can be involved in like the digital field or the tech field, and at the same time draw boundaries and prioritize like physical or face-to-face interactions. Because I actually had a very recent interview with her network, and it's actually one of the largest consultancies for women health professionals in Europe. And when they asked me what is like you feel in the last 3 years, the top challenge facing women's health. And I said that because like for me, a lot of my public speaking and empowerment is also through social media, through Instagram. And I said, it's very alarming, the number of women, particularly young women, and as young, it starts with teenage, that they come online to seek validation because they don't get that validation in actually having strong physical female friendships. So they come online and through many methods, but the most common method for female validation online is through something known as sexual commodification. And often it is disguised as expression of sexuality, but there's obviously a difference, because expression of sexuality is to empower oneself, but sexual commodification is when you market yourself particularly only for the male gaze. So what happens to a lot of young women is because they don't have strong nurturing bonds around them, female friendships, they tend to be caught between either people who idolize them based on very materialistic standards, or they have the other side which shame them. And this is growing, and this affects a lot of women's mental, emotional, even physical health. So going back to your example of your son, and even what Geneva said, you can be in the social media, you can be in the tech, in the digital, but you cannot seek validation from it. You cannot seek like, or you can, because it is an artificial medium, you cannot seek and fulfill all your needs from that. So I think especially with a lot of young people today, they are not able to understand those boundaries, that world is not real.
Yeah, it's a beautiful observation. And, when I like teach a full course on the impact of the digital age, right, on us as humans and relationships, I always spend quite a bit of time like acknowledging at the same time that the digital age, if we just, broad sweep it, right, has been allowed many people to have access to other people who, in solidarity, to organize. Like there's so much good, and right, we have to be thinking critically, teaching our children digital literacy. Our schools need to be doing this. We have to have these conversations. And it's tricky.
It's very tricky. I always think of it as like, for example, when we put makeup to dress up for a situation, it does not mean the makeup can accentuate or help you feel maybe confident while giving a presentation, but doesn't take away from the natural beauty which is God-given. You should feel proud in your own skin. So in the same way, a lot of people, their entire identity is only based online. They feel like they are nothing without that online identity. And as someone who is currently dating and looking for my future forever, I can say without a doubt that it affects even like your dating, because a lot of people are very comfortable, alarmingly, to have virtual relationships, and they
Mhm.
struggle a lot, like especially with a lot of men who are not raised to acknowledge rejection. So when they come for an actual date, and because a woman has the right to say no, so a lot of them struggle with it, so they avoid coming for the date. So this is just like another insight.
Yeah. And, one of the reasons I recommended Dr. Turkle's book, Reclaiming Conversation, she addresses the whole of it. And there's lots of other great resources out there, but I like to sort of bring it to, like, that would be where I would start for people, whether you're a parent, whether you're dating, whether you're 102 and living with other women or alone or whatever. That book, I highly encourage, book groups, assign it at work. It's profound. When I used it as a primary text in class, I would often have students in tears because they said they were able to finally name something that they had never been able to name before, why they were sad or lonely or anxious or depressed. And then they got even more sad because they're like, but now I have the answer. And how am I going to change the world? Right. I'm like, well, you do that one relationship at a time. But Geneva, you have had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, thank you so much for this. This has been really enlightening and stimulating. Kind of to follow up on my question, I think we've talked about technology. There are certainly benefits of technology, and actually, when we talk about technology these days, we're really talking about a fairly limited segment of technology. I had a career. I'm retired now. I had a career in academic research, and I used a lot of technology to benefit. We're looking at a segment of technology now that is driven by the profit motive of capitalism. And I don't have a cell phone. If you get a hit of dopamine in your nucleus accumbens from doing something on your cell phone, there's somebody behind that knows that's happening and is designing that equipment to do that. And that's the kind of thing I think we need to try to bring to the fore and object to. And I think change isn't going to come until we can start taking the kind of conversation we're having here about loneliness and really address the impact of our economic system and this bipolar political system we have and start changing that. I mean, I think we need to be opening up that kind of conversation and realize that there are alternatives. There are alternative ways of running our economic system. So the purpose is to benefit people and the planet, and not just a purpose of garnering huge profits for a small number of people. We could have a political system that is not this bipolar political system that allows a lot more conversations, a lot more creative thinking about how to solve problems. And I would like to see this kind of conversation acknowledging the importance of connecting to those larger social pressures that really underlie how we live our lives, happily or not.
No, you raised you're getting to the heart of the matter. I was looking around because I was trying to find the book. It's yellow, that I would recommend if any of you who are still on or interested in sort of just critically looking at some of these questions that Geneva was raising. It's called Irresistible. Oh, I really want to. I should have had them all right here. I have so many of them in a whole book, but Irresistible. Really, it dissects what the tech industries, what big tech is doing, has done. Right? I mean, they have on their staff, right? All of the social scientists and psychologists, I mean, they're picking the colors, right? The yellow is so, like, it keeps you coming back for more. This notion of scrolling, like doom scrolling or scrolling, it's the same mechanisms in our brains, like using a slot machine, right? Like, we know all this now. And Geneva, there are a number of organizations that and many of them in Silicon Valley who are driving these conversations and creating organized resistance for the health and well-being of our entire democracy, right? So those, again, are some of the areas that give me a bit of hope, but yeah.
Still got a long way to go, I think.
I know. I have about 3 minutes left before I need to go pick up my dog and drive some golf carts, but any last comments or questions or things you want to bring to the fore for the last minute or two? Well, I hope that we can continue this conversation in person at some point. It's always different digitally, but I appreciate you all turning on your cameras. At least we got a little bit of eye contact with you. And feel free, we will send out the resources, my contact info. We just scratched the surface today, but I hope it left you with some things to think about. So thank you all for coming. Happy Benny Day.
Thank you. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye.
Everybody.